Thousands of sleek, obsidian ships arranged themselves in perfect formation above Earth, their hulls gleaming with an eerie, unnatural glow. From orbit, the planet's vibrant blues and greens looked fragile, like a precious gemstone waiting to be claimed. On the bridge of the flagship Dominion Ascendant, Admiral Zarin surveyed the scene with cold, calculating eyes. His tall, imposing figure stood clad in ceremonial armor that gleamed under the sterile bridge lights. His every movement exuded authority, and his voice carried the weight of 1,000 conquered worlds. "Prepare the broadcast," Zarin commanded. His tone was devoid of urgency, as if this was merely another routine conquest. Let them see the face of their new masters. Within moments, his image was projected across the planet's airwaves, hijacking every screen and communication device. His face, pale and angular, appeared stern yet calm. "People of Earth," Zarin began, his voice resonating with mechanical precision. "Rejoice, for you are to be incorporated into the Galactic Empire. Our fleet above your skies is impervious, our technology insurmountable. Resistance is futile. Surrender now, and your species will be spared unnecessary suffering. Defy us, and your world will burn." Below, on the surface, the mood was grim. In a fortified underground bunker hidden deep beneath the Appalachian Mountains, Colonel Mike Ronald stood before a flickering holomap, the Admiral's ultimatum still echoing in his mind. Ronalds was a rugged man in his late 40s, his face weathered by years of war and loss. The bunker was crowded with Earth's remaining military leaders, their uniforms mismatched and worn, a stark contrast to the pristine order of the Empire's forces. "This is it," Ronald said, breaking the heavy silence. His gravelly voice carried the weight of a man who had seen the brink of extinction before. "They think we're beaten, just like every other planet they've steamrolled. But they've never faced Earth. They've never faced us." A ripple of uncertain murmurs spread through the room. "Colonel," interjected General Harris, a grizzled veteran of Earth's many internal conflicts, "what chance do we have? You saw the broadcast. Their ships are impervious. We've thrown everything we have at them in the past, and it barely scratched their shields." Ronalds turned to face the room, his dark eyes burning with conviction. "Every empire has a weakness. I refuse to believe theirs is any different. We just have to find it." In a corner of the room, Lieutenant Alex Edwards, a younger officer with a sharp tactical mind, leaned closer to Ronalds. "Sir, with respect, even if we find a weakness, our resources are stretched thin. We're fighting with scraps compared to their arsenal." Ronalds's lips curled into a faint, determined smirk. "Then we'll turn those scraps into a spear sharp enough to pierce their pride." As the meeting continued, the mood shifted from despair to grim determination. Plans were drawn, resources inventoried, and teams dispatched to analyze every piece of data Earth's defenders had managed to gather during the Empire's initial attacks. The Empire's confidence in their technology had left them careless, allowing human forces to scavenge fragments of their equipment from skirmishes. Meanwhile, back aboard the Dominion Ascendant, Admiral Zarin paced the bridge, observing the planet below through a massive viewport. His second-in-command, Commander Vrel, approached cautiously. "Admiral," Vrel said, his voice tinged with unease, "do you not find it curious that these humans haven't surrendered outright? Most species are broken by our arrival alone." Zarin dismissed the concern with a wave of his hand. "Curious, perhaps, but irrelevant. These primitives are clinging to hope like insects clinging to a burning leaf. Their struggle is inconsequential. By the time our orbital bombardment begins, they'll beg for mercy. Still," Vrel persisted, "their resourcefulness is—" "Enough," Zarin snapped, his icy gaze silencing further protest. "I have seen their kind before, desperate, fractured, and blind to the futility of their defiance. They will fall, just as all others before them have fallen. Back on Earth." Colonel Ronald stood alone in a dimly lit corridor outside the war room, staring at a worn photograph of his late brother, a fellow soldier who had died in the Empire's first wave of attacks. The weight of responsibility pressed heavily on his shoulders, but the flicker of hope in his heart burned brighter than the despair surrounding him. If this is humanity's last stand, he muttered to himself, tucking the photograph into his pocket, then we'll make damn sure they never forget it. The scene shifted to the night sky above Earth, where the Empire's fleet loomed like a constellation of death. The humans below scrambled to prepare for the inevitable assault, their hopes resting on ingenuity and sheer will. Unbeknownst to Zarin, the Empire's overconfidence would soon become its undoing. Deep within a hidden military research base buried beneath miles of rock, the hum of outdated machinery mixed with the voices of exhausted engineers and scientists. The facility, hastily converted from an old Cold War bunker, was humanity's last hope for uncovering the secret behind the Galactic Empire's impenetrable shields. Harsh fluorescent lights flickered intermittently, casting an unsettling glow over the cramped space. At the center of the chaos stood Dr. Mike Havel, an unkempt man in his early 50s, his lab coat perpetually stained with grease and soot. His wild, untamed hair matched the frenetic energy with which he worked. Despite his disheveled appearance, his piercing blue eyes shone with a razor-sharp intellect that had earned him respect even among Earth's dwindling scientific community. Again, Havel barked, gesturing toward a cracked holographic display. His voice carried a manic edge as he pointed to a fragment of alien circuitry salvaged from one of the Empire's drones. "We're missing something. Run the frequency test again." Nearby, Lieutenant Alex Edwards adjusted his headset and typed commands into a console. Edwards, younger and more composed, was a steady hand in the storm that was Havel. "We've run the test 4 times already, Doctor. The results aren't changing." Havel spun around, his expression equal parts frustration and determination. "Then run it a 5th time. Somewhere in this alien scrap is the key to breaking their shields, and I refuse to let their arrogance be proven right." Edwards sighed but complied, running the test as the lab's other personnel exchanged wary glances. The tension in the room was palpable. Every failed experiment felt like another nail in humanity's coffin. Colonel Mike Ronalds entered the room, his broad shoulders brushing against the narrow doorframe. He scanned the lab, his presence immediately commanding attention. "Havel, report." "Colonel," Havel said, straightening, though his tone retained its edge, "we've identified the base composition of the Empire's shields, an energy field harmonized across multiple spectrums. It's adaptive and self-reinforcing, which is why conventional weapons can't penetrate it. And," Ronalds pressed, his voice low and steady, "and," Havel continued, gesturing animatedly, "I believe there's a flaw. During high-energy impacts, the shields emit a minute energy fluctuation, a ripple, if you will. It's almost imperceptible, but if we can synchronize an attack to exploit that ripple, we could destabilize the entire system." Ronalds frowned. "Almost imperceptible? Are we betting humanity's survival on a maybe?" "It's more than a maybe," Havel snapped, stepping closer. "It's science. I just need more time to fine-tune the frequency modulation." "We don't have time," Ronalds replied firmly. "The Empire's fleet is preparing for an orbital bombardment. We need results now." The weight of Ronalds' words silenced the room. Havel stared at him, then turned back to his equipment. "Then we push harder. I'll sleep when this is over." Hours passed as the team worked tirelessly, analyzing data and running simulations. Finally, as the clock ticked past midnight, a breakthrough occurred. The room erupted into a mix of cheers and relieved sighs as the holographic display lit up with promising results. "It works," Havel said, his voice tinged with awe. "By firing a low-frequency electromagnetic pulse just before a concentrated kinetic impact, the shields collapse momentarily. The key is timing. It has to be precise." Edwards looked at the screen, his brow furrowed. "How do we implement this in the field? Most of our anti-aircraft systems are decades old. Retrofitting them will take weeks, and we don't have weeks." Ronalds' expression hardened. "We'll make do. We've done it before, and we'll do it again." "Havel, prepare schematics for retrofitting." Edwards, coordinate with the logistics teams and start pulling whatever anti-aircraft platforms we have left out of storage. We'll need to work in shifts. Havel nodded, already lost in thought as he began sketching designs on a nearby tablet. Edwards stepped closer to Ronalds. Colonel, even if we retrofit these systems, what's the plan for deploying them? We don't have enough to cover every major city. Ronalds' eyes narrowed. We don't need to cover every city. We need one victory, just one. If we can take down even a single Empire ship, it'll prove they're not invincible. That's the kind of spark that could reignite the fire in people's hearts. The plan was ambitious, bordering on reckless, but desperation left little room for caution. Teams across the bunker mobilized, dragging rusted anti-aircraft platforms from long-forgotten depots. Engineers worked alongside soldiers, stripping the old systems down to their cores and rebuilding them with Havel's modifications. Despite the exhaustion, a new energy coursed through the base. The prospect of finally striking back against the Empire gave the beleaguered defenders a renewed sense of purpose. As the first modified weapon was assembled, Ronald stood beside Havel and Edwards, watching the final tests. The weapon, a hybrid of human ingenuity and alien technology, looked like a patchwork monstrosity but hummed with a quiet, lethal promise. "It's ugly," Edwards remarked, folding his arms. "It'll get the job done," Havel replied, a rare smile tugging at his lips. Ronalds placed a hand on Havel's shoulder. "Good work. Now, let's see if it lives up to its promise." The modified weapon is successfully tested in the field, targeting a drone and shattering its shields before obliterating it in a fiery explosion. The scene cuts to Admiral Zarin aboard his flagship, his expression darkening as reports of the test reach him. "So," he murmurs, his voice a dangerous whisper, "the insects have found a sting." The tension escalates, leaving readers eager to see how humanity's first strike against the Empire will unfold. The city of Ashfall, once a bustling metropolis, now lay in ruins beneath the Empire's imposing shadow. Crumbled skyscrapers and shattered streets bore silent witness to humanity's struggle for survival. Under the cover of darkness, Colonel Mike Ronalds and Major Ryan Cole crouched behind a barricade of debris, surveying the trap they had painstakingly set. "This feels like madness," Cole muttered, wiping grime from his face. His rugged features were taut with tension. "We're betting everything on these modified guns, and they've only been tested once." Ronalds' gaze didn't waver from the horizon. "Madness is the only card we have left," he replied, his voice steady. "If this works, it's not just a victory. It's proof that the Empire isn't invincible." Around them, scattered squads of soldiers worked in silence, camouflaging the newly retrofitted anti-aircraft platforms among the wreckage. The bulky, makeshift weapons hummed faintly, their modified electromagnetic pulses ready for activation. The air was thick with anticipation, every man hyper-aware of the stakes. In the distance, the Empire's ships appeared, cutting through the night sky like black blades. Their ominous hum filled the air, drowning out all other sounds. At the forefront was a cruiser, its size dwarfing the shattered remains of Ashfall. Its sleek, alien design radiated menace, its shield shimmering faintly as it hovered low over the city. "Hold your positions," Ronalds ordered, his voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through him. "Let them think we're defenseless." The Empire's fleet began its methodical sweep, scanning for signs of resistance. From aboard the cruiser, Commander Vrel, Zarin's second-in-command, observed the desolation below with practiced detachment. "Humans in their ruins," Vrel remarked, shaking his head. "Their defiance is as pathetic as it is predictable." A junior officer approached, saluting stiffly. "Commander, no significant energy signatures detected. Shall we proceed with the cleansing protocols?" Vrel nodded. "Begin the bombardment. Let this city serve as a warning to the rest of there." A deafening crack interrupted him. One of the cruiser's forward shields flared brightly before collapsing in a spectacular shower of energy. Alarms blared as the ship rocked violently, throwing Vrel against the console. "What in the void was that?" he shouted, scrambling to his feet. On the ground, Ronald's voice rang out through the comms. "Fire! Now!" The modified anti-aircraft platforms roared to life, their pulsing electromagnetic blasts synchronized with kinetic shells. The precise timing of the pulses destabilized the cruiser's shields, leaving them vulnerable to the relentless barrage. Explosions rippled across the ship's hull, tearing through its sleek exterior. Above, the cruiser's crew struggled to respond. "Shields are failing across multiple sectors," an officer reported, panic lacing his voice. "Impossible," Vrel bellowed. "Their weapons shouldn't be able to." Another blast rocked the ship, silencing him. On the ground, Captain Evan Jace, leading the air support team, flew his battered fighter jet in tight formation with two others. His voice crackled over the comms. "Colonel, the shields are down. We're going in to finish the job." "Copy that," Ronalds replied, his tone steely. "Make it count." Jace's squad unleashed a barrage of missiles, each one striking the now exposed sections of the cruiser. The explosions were blinding, illuminating the city below like flashes of lightning. With a final thunderous detonation, the cruiser split apart, its remains crashing into the ruins of ashfall in a fiery cascade. Cheers erupted among the human forces. Soldiers who had been moments away from despair now shouted in triumph, their voices echoing through the rubble. Ronalds allowed himself a rare smile, though it was tempered by the weight of the moment. "One ship down," he murmured, "but the war is far from over." Their victory was short-lived. The remaining Empire ships in the fleet adjusted their positions, their movements no longer slow and methodical but sharp and reactive. From the command bridge of the flagship Dominion Ascendant, Admiral Zarin watched the destruction of the cruiser with narrowed eyes. "So," Zarin said, his voice a dangerous calm, "the insects have grown fangs." "Interesting." A junior officer hesitated before speaking. "Admiral, should we prepare a full retaliation strike?" Zarin raised a hand to silence him. "No. They've revealed their hand. Let them savor their little triumph. It will make their eventual defeat all the sweeter. Withdraw the fleet for now. We will adapt." Back in Ashfall, Ronalds and his team regrouped. The victory had come at a cost. Several anti-aircraft platforms had been destroyed in the skirmish, and casualties among the ground forces were mounting. Ronalds knelt beside a wounded soldier, gripping the young man's hand as medics worked to stabilize him. "You did good, son," Ronalds said quietly. "Rest now. You've earned it." The soldier nodded weakly before being carried away. Major Cole approached, his expression grim. "We won this round, but they're going to come back harder. We need to be ready." "We will be," Ronalds replied firmly. This was about more than just taking down a ship. This was about showing the world and the Empire that we can fight back. As dawn broke over the ruins, the sight of the fallen cruiser filled the survivors with a mix of hope and determination. It wasn't just wreckage. It was a symbol. The Galactic Empire, for all its technological superiority, was not untouchable. Ronald stood atop a pile of rubble, addressing the weary soldiers and engineers gathered below. His voice carried strength born of conviction. "They told us their ships couldn't be destroyed," he said, gesturing to the smoldering remains behind him. "But today, we proved them wrong. This is just the beginning. They will come for us again, but next time, we'll be ready. And we'll make them remember the name of Earth." The sound of drills, hammers, and roaring engines filled the cavernous underground base. Humanity was no longer merely surviving. It was fighting back. Across the globe, resistance cells coordinated efforts to retrofit more of Earth's aging weaponry with the newfound shield-breaking technology. What began as desperation had transformed into something dangerous for the Empire. Hope. Colonel Mike Ronald stood at a tactical display in the command center, watching as holographic markers representing Earth's scattered forces began to converge in strategic clusters. His scarred hand hovered over the map, pointing toward the Indian Ocean. "They're regrouping here," he said, his tone resolute. "This is their staging ground for a counteroffensive. If we can hit them hard enough to disrupt their fleet operations, it'll buy us the time we need to push further. Assuming we even have the strength to mount an offensive," said Major Ryan Cole, leaning against the edge of the console. His face bore fresh bruises from a recent skirmish. "We've made progress, but they still outnumber and outgun us. One mistake, and this entire plan falls apart." "They outnumber us, sure," interjected Lieutenant Alex Edwards, who had been running simulations on a nearby terminal. "But we've learned their tactics. They underestimate us every time. That arrogance is our biggest weapon." Ronalds nodded. "Exactly. We don't need to destroy their entire fleet. Just enough to shatter their illusion of invincibility. Once other worlds see they can bleed, the Empire will have more than us to worry about." Across the room, Dr. Mike Hovell strode in, carrying a data pad loaded with fresh schematics. His normally frazzled demeanor had shifted to one of steely focus. "The next generation of modifications is ready," he announced. "We've refined the pulse emitters and integrated them into portable missile systems. They'll be easier to deploy and harder for the Empire to counter." Ronald studied the designs, a flicker of approval crossing his face. "Good work, Hovell. Deploy these to our forward units immediately. Time is not on our side." As the team dispersed, Ronalds lingered at the tactical display, his eyes fixed on the holographic representation of Earth. He knew this moment was pivotal. Either they would seize the initiative, or humanity's resistance would crumble under the Empire's next assault. High above the Indian Ocean, the Empire's fleet hovered like predatory birds circling their prey. From the bridge of the flagship Dominion Ascendant, Admiral Zarin observed the gathering human forces with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. "They've become emboldened," Zarin remarked, his voice cool. "Perhaps destroying their capital wasn't sufficient to extinguish their spirit." Commander Vrel stood stiffly beside him, his expression betraying unease. "Admiral, their shield-breaking technology is spreading. If we allow them to grow bolder, it could inspire resistance on other occupied worlds." Zarin's gaze didn't waver. "Then we will crush them so thoroughly that no one will dare to rise against us again." Vrel hesitated. "Permission to speak freely, Admiral?" Zarin inclined his head slightly. "Underestimating them may be a mistake. They've already destroyed one of our cruisers. If they manage another victory—" "They will not," Zarin interrupted, his tone like ice. "You're mistaking a desperate fluke for a legitimate threat. Ready the fleet. I want this planet reduced to ash by nightfall." On the surface, the Resistance had set its plan into motion. In a stretch of open sea near the Maldives, a decoy fleet of old, unmanned ships created the illusion of a massive military presence. The Empire's sensors, attuned to detecting large energy signatures, honed in on the bait. "They're taking it," Edwards reported from a forward observation post, his voice crackling over the comms. "Their cruisers are moving into position." "Hold steady," Ronald ordered. He stood on a concealed platform several miles away, surrounded by newly deployed missile systems and anti-aircraft platforms. The real attack force waited in silence, hidden beneath layers of camouflage. As the Empire's ships descended, the trap was sprung. Pulse emitters activated, their synchronized blasts rippling through the air like silent thunder. The leading cruiser's shields flickered, then failed entirely. Earth's missile batteries erupted in a coordinated salvo, striking the ship's vulnerable underbelly. Explosions tore through its hull, sending pieces of twisted metal spiraling into the ocean below. Before the remaining cruisers could react, fighter squadrons emerged from hidden hangars on nearby islands, their retrofitted weapons blazing. Ronalds' voice rang out over the comms. "Focus fire on their lead ship. We take it down, and the rest will scatter." The battle that followed was chaos. Empire ships unleashed beams of plasma that carved through the ocean, vaporizing water in massive columns of steam. Human forces retaliated with unrelenting precision, exploiting every weakness in the Empire's armor. From the bridge of the Dominion Ascendant, Zarin watched the unfolding carnage, his expression darkening. "How is this possible?" he demanded. "Their technology shouldn't be capable of this." "They've adapted," Vrel said grimly. "We underestimated them." Zarin's jaw tightened. "Then we will not underestimate them again." He turned sharply. "Deploy the dreadnought." The Dominion Ascendant descended into the fray, its massive cannons glowing with ominous light. From his vantage point, Ronald saw the behemoth ship approaching and felt the weight of what was to come. "This is it," he muttered. The final push. As the Dominion Ascendant prepared to fire, Havel's latest innovation was brought to bear. A prototype weapon, a concentrated pulse cannon mounted on a repurposed naval vessel, was aimed directly at the dreadnought. "Target locked," Havel's voice came through the comms. Ronalds gave the order. "Fire." The cannon unleashed a brilliant arc of energy, striking the Dominion Ascendant dead center. Its shields flared violently before collapsing, leaving the ship exposed. Human forces poured everything they had into the opening, missiles and energy blasts hammering the flagship relentlessly. In a final cataclysmic explosion, the Dominion Ascendant was torn apart, its remains plunging into the sea. The battlefield fell silent as the remaining Empire ships retreated, their formation broken. On the surface, cheers erupted among the human forces, their voices carrying a mix of relief and triumph. Ronald stood amidst the ruins of their hidden base, his face grim but resolute. He knew the battle was won, but the war was far from over. "This isn't the end," he said quietly to Edwards, who stood beside him. "But it's the beginning of something they didn't think possible." Edwards nodded, his expression determined. "We turn the tide today. Now we make sure it stays in our favor." Ronalds looked toward the horizon, where the wreckage of the Empire's flagship still smoldered. Humanity had proven it could fight back and win, but as he stared into the distance, he knew the hardest battles were yet to come.